There's something profound that happens the moment you stop seeking approval from others. It's not what you'd expect. It's not rebellion or defiance or some grand declaration of independence. It's quieter than that. It's deeper. It's the subtle shift from performing your life to actually living it. Most people spend their entire existence as prisoners of other people's opinions. They dress for approval. They speak for applause. They choose careers that look impressive rather than feel authentic. They construct elaborate personas designed to win validation from people who are too busy seeking their own validation to notice. And in this desperate dance for acceptance, they slowly lose touch with the most important relationship they'll ever have, the one with themselves. The ancient Stoics understood this trap intimately. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He wasn't writing for publication or posterity. He was writing for his own soul, wrestling with the same human tendency that plagues us today. The need to be liked, accepted, and approved of by others. But here's what Marcus discovered through his own inner work, and what you can discover too. The moment you stop needing everyone's approval is the moment you become truly free. Not free from responsibility or consequence, but free from the exhausting weight of constantly managing other people's perceptions of you. This freedom isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It's not about ignoring feedback or refusing to grow. It's about distinguishing between the opinions that serve your growth and the noise that simply distracts from your purpose. It's about developing such a clear sense of your own values that external validation becomes unnecessary. Not because you don't care about others, but because you've learned to trust your own judgment. The path to this freedom begins with an uncomfortable truth. Most of what you think you want isn't actually what you want. It's what you've been told to want. The career path that impresses your parents, the lifestyle that looks good on social media, the achievements that win applause from people whose approval you've been conditioned to seek. These aren't necessarily bad things, but when they become the primary drivers of your choices, you're no longer living your life. You're performing someone else's script. Socrates spent his life questioning these inherited assumptions. He wandered through the marketplace of Athens, engaging anyone who would listen in conversations designed to peel back the layers of social conditioning. His famous declaration, "I know that I know nothing," wasn't false modesty. It was a recognition that most of what we think we know about success, happiness, and meaning comes from sources outside ourselves. When you begin to question these assumptions, something remarkable happens. You discover that many of your deepest fears about disappointing others are based on stories you've been telling yourself. You realize that the people whose approval you've been desperately seeking are often too caught up in their own approval seeking to judge you as harshly as you imagine. You find that authentic connection actually becomes easier when you're not constantly calculating how to be perceived. But this process requires what the Stoics called courage. Not the courage of the battlefield, but the moral courage to disappoint others when your integrity demands it. The courage to say no when yes would be easier. The courage to pursue what matters to you even when others don't understand. The courage to be wrong, to change your mind, to admit when you don't know something. Epictetus, who spent his early life as a slave, understood this better than most. He had experienced the ultimate form of approval seeking, the desperate need to please masters who literally owned him. Yet he discovered that even in slavery, his mind remained free. "No one can hurt you without your permission," he taught. This wasn't naive optimism. It was hard-won wisdom about where true power actually lies. The same principle applies to the more subtle forms of mental slavery that characterize modern life. When you're constantly seeking approval, you've given away your power. You've made your emotional well-being dependent on variables you can't control, other people's moods, opinions, and reactions. This is exhausting and ultimately futile, because people's opinions change, and what pleases one person often displeases another. The alternative isn't isolation or indifference. It's what Seneca called living according to nature, which for humans means living according to reason and virtue, rather than impulse and social pressure. It means developing such clarity about your own values that you can engage with others from a place of strength rather than need. This shift transforms every aspect of your life. Your relationships become more authentic because you're no longer performing a role designed to win approval. Your work becomes more meaningful because it's aligned with your actual interests and values rather than what looks impressive to others. Your creative expression flows more freely because you're not censoring yourself to avoid judgment. The irony is that when you stop desperately seeking approval, you often become more genuinely likable. People are drawn to authenticity. They respect those who have the courage to be themselves. They trust those who aren't constantly calculating how to be perceived. There's something magnetic about a person who has done the inner work of knowing themselves and is comfortable in their own skin. But this isn't about becoming more likable. That would just be another form of approval seeking. It's about becoming more yourself. It's about discovering what you actually think, feel, and want when you strip away all the layers of external expectation. It's about learning to trust your own judgment while remaining open to feedback and growth. The practical implications of this are profound. When you're not seeking approval, you make decisions differently. Instead of choosing based on what looks good to others, you choose based on what feels right to you. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations to maintain approval, you engage honestly and directly. This doesn't mean you become reckless or inconsiderate. If anything, you become more thoughtful because your choices are coming from a deeper place. When you're not performing for approval, you have more energy to actually contribute to the people and causes you care about. When you're not managing your image, you can focus on living with integrity. This isn't about becoming callous or self-centered. It's about recognizing that true service to others flows from inner freedom, not from desperate need for validation. Consider the people who have made the greatest positive impact on the world. They weren't people pleasers. They were individuals who had the courage to stand for something, even when it was unpopular. They were willing to disappoint some people in service of a higher purpose. They understood that trying to please everyone is a recipe for pleasing no one, including yourself. The journey to inner freedom through releasing the need for approval isn't always comfortable. There will be moments when you disappoint people you care about. There will be times when you're misunderstood or criticized. There will be periods when the old patterns of seeking validation feel more appealing than the uncertain path of authenticity. But these moments are not setbacks. They're opportunities to deepen your commitment to living from your own center. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you strengthen your capacity for inner freedom. Each time you trust your own judgment over external validation, you build confidence in your ability to navigate life on your own terms. The goal isn't to become indifferent to others or to stop caring about their well-being. The goal is to distinguish between healthy consideration for others and unhealthy dependence on their approval. The goal is to care about people without needing their validation. The goal is to contribute to their lives from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. This distinction is crucial because it determines whether your relationships are based on mutual respect or unconscious manipulation. When you're seeking approval, you're subtly trying to control how others perceive you. When you're free from that need, you can engage with others more honestly and directly. You can love them without needing them to love you back in any particular way. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote, "Remember that very little disturbs the wise man." This freedom isn't about controlling external circumstances. It's about not being controlled by them. It's about finding your center and living from that place regardless of what others think or do. The path forward requires daily practice. It requires catching yourself in the act of seeking approval and gently redirecting your attention to your own values and judgment. It requires learning to sit with the discomfort of disappointing others when your integrity demands it. It requires developing the capacity to receive feedback without immediately internalizing it as truth or rejecting it as irrelevant. Most importantly, it requires patience with yourself as you unlearn decades of conditioning. The need for approval runs deep, and it doesn't disappear overnight. But each small step toward inner freedom creates momentum for the next. Each moment of choosing authenticity over approval strengthens your capacity for self-trust. This is the beginning of true inner freedom, the recognition that your worth doesn't depend on other people's opinions, that your path doesn't require their permission, and that your peace comes from alignment with your deepest values rather than external validation. Now let's dive deeper into what actually happens when you begin to release this need for external validation. Because this isn't just about changing your mindset, it's about rewiring the fundamental operating system that's been running your life for decades. The moment you begin to withdraw from the approval-seeking game, something profound starts to shift in your nervous system. Your body has been in a constant state of hypervigilance, scanning every room for threats to your social standing, monitoring every facial expression for signs of disapproval, calculating every word before it leaves your mouth. This chronic tension has been so normalized that you've forgotten what it feels like to simply exist without performing. When you start trusting your own judgment over the crowd's opinion, your nervous system begins to downregulate. That tight feeling in your chest starts to loosen. The constant chatter in your mind about what others think begins to quiet. You discover that beneath all that noise was a person who actually had opinions, preferences, and instincts all along. But here's where most people stumble in this process. They expect this transformation to feel immediately liberating, like some kind of spiritual awakening where suddenly everything becomes clear and easy. The reality is far messier and infinitely more valuable. The first thing you'll notice is loneliness. Not the surface level loneliness of being alone on a Friday night, but the deeper existential loneliness of realizing how many of your relationships were built on performance rather than authenticity. When you stop saying what people want to hear, some people stop wanting to hear from you at all. When you stop being endlessly available and accommodating, some friends reveal themselves to have been users rather than genuine companions. This pruning process is painful but necessary. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote about the loneliness of leadership, of standing by your principles even when it isolates you from the crowd. The emperor who could have been loved by everyone chose instead to be respected by himself, and history vindicated that choice. You'll also encounter what I call the identity crisis phase. For so long, you've defined yourself through the lens of others' approval that when you remove that mirror, you temporarily lose sight of who you are. Without the constant feedback loop of validation, you're forced to confront the question that terrifies most people. Who am I when nobody's watching? This is where the real work begins. You start having to make decisions based on your own compass rather than the crowd's direction. You begin to notice your authentic preferences, the ones that exist beneath the layers of conditioning and people-pleasing. Maybe you discover you actually hate networking events, but love deep one-on-one conversations. Maybe you realize you've been choosing careers based on prestige rather than passion, relationships based on security rather than connection. The process of reclaiming your authentic self requires what the Stoics called practical wisdom. It's not enough to intellectually understand that you don't need others' approval. You have to practice living from that truth daily. This means disappointing people regularly, not out of cruelty, but out of integrity. You'll find yourself saying no to invitations that don't align with your values, even when saying yes would make you more popular. You'll express opinions that might be unpopular, but feel true to you. You'll make choices that serve your long-term growth rather than your short-term social comfort. Here's what's fascinating about this process. As you become less concerned with what others think, you paradoxically become more interesting to the right people. Authenticity has a magnetic quality that performance can never replicate. When you stop trying to be everything to everyone, you become something valuable to someone. The people who are drawn to your authentic self aren't looking for entertainment or validation from you. They're attracted to your groundedness, your ability to stand in your own truth without apology. These relationships, built on genuine compatibility rather than mutual need, become the foundation of a life worth living. But the transformation goes deeper than just relationships. When you stop seeking approval, you reclaim the massive amount of mental and emotional energy that was previously devoted to managing your image. This energy becomes available for creativity, for pursuing meaningful work, for developing skills and interests that actually matter to you. You start making decisions faster because you're not constantly weighing how each choice will be perceived by others. You become more decisive, more willing to take calculated risks, more able to pivot when something isn't working. The paralysis that comes from trying to please everyone dissolves when you're only accountable to your own values and long-term vision. Your relationship with failure fundamentally changes as well. When you're not performing for an audience, failure becomes information rather than identity. A rejected proposal, a failed project, a relationship that doesn't work out, these stop being reflections of your worth and start being data points in your ongoing experiment of living authentically. This shift allows you to take the kinds of risks that approval seekers never can. You can start the business that might fail because you're not worried about looking foolish. You can pursue the relationship that might not work out because you're not terrified of being judged for your choices. You can create art that might be criticized because you're not dependent on universal praise for your sense of self-worth. The paradox deepens when you realize that this inner freedom actually makes you more valuable in the marketplace of life. Employers are drawn to people who can think independently and make decisions without constant validation. Romantic partners are attracted to individuals who have a strong sense of self, rather than those who mold themselves to be attractive. Friends gravitate toward people who are genuine, rather than those who are constantly performing. When you stop chasing approval, you develop what Epictetus called true wealth, the wealth that comes from wanting what you have rather than having what you want. You become content with your own company, secure in your own judgment, and confident in your own path. This internal security creates a kind of unshakable foundation that external circumstances cannot disturb. But perhaps the most profound shift is in your relationship with time itself. When you're not constantly managing your image and seeking validation, you're actually present for your own life. You're not living 3 steps ahead, worried about how your current choices will be perceived. You're not stuck 3 steps behind, ruminating about whether you said the right thing or made the right impression. You become fully inhabitable in your own experience, able to savor the texture of your days rather than rushing through them toward the next opportunity for approval. This presence, this ability to be fully where you are, is what the ancient philosophers called wisdom. It's what modern psychology calls flow. It's what spiritual traditions call enlightenment. The path away from approval seeking is ultimately a path toward presence, toward authenticity, toward the kind of unshakable inner freedom that no external force can disturb. It's not an easy path, but it's the only path that leads to a life that's truly your own. When you finally arrive at this place of inner sovereignty, you realize that what you were seeking through others' approval was always available within yourself. Living with such radical independence from external validation creates what philosophers have called the paradox of freedom. The less you need from others, the more they're drawn to you. The less you perform, the more authentic presence you radiate. The less you chase approval, the more respect naturally flows toward you. This isn't a strategy or manipulation. It's the natural consequence of becoming whole within yourself. When you stop leaking energy through the desperate need for validation, that energy consolidates into something far more powerful: genuine self-possession. But here's where most people stumble on this path. They mistake detachment from approval for detachment from connection itself. They build walls instead of boundaries. They confuse independence with isolation. This is not the freedom we're discussing. True inner freedom makes you more available for authentic relationship, not less. The difference is profound. When you were approval dependent, conversations were performances designed to impress. Now they become genuine exchanges between two whole people. This shift transforms every relationship in your life. Your romantic partnerships deepen because you're no longer looking for someone to complete you. Your friendships become more honest because you're not afraid of conflict or disappointment. Your professional relationships gain respect because you operate from principles rather than people-pleasing. Even your relationship with failure changes completely. When you were seeking approval, failure felt like death because it threatened your source of worth. Now failure becomes information. It's feedback from reality about what works and what doesn't. You can fail at something without feeling like a failure as a person. This creates what psychologists call anti-fragility. You don't just bounce back from setbacks, you actually grow stronger from them. Each challenge becomes an opportunity to prove to yourself that your worth isn't dependent on outcomes. Each disappointment confirms that your peace comes from within, not from external circumstances. The practical implications ripple through every area of life. You make career decisions based on alignment with your values rather than what others expect. You choose relationships that enhance your growth rather than ones that simply provide comfort or status. You pursue goals that matter to you deeply rather than goals that look impressive to others. Your creative expression flourishes because you're no longer editing yourself for an imaginary audience. Your authentic voice emerges, often surprising you with its power and uniqueness. You discover talents and interests you never explored because they didn't seem socially acceptable or profitable. Perhaps most importantly, you develop what the Stoics called sympathia, a deep connection to the interconnectedness of all life. When you're not constantly focused on getting approval from others, you can actually see them clearly. You notice their struggles, their beauty, their humanity. You become more compassionate because you're no longer viewing everyone as potential sources of validation or threats to your self-image. This compassion extends to yourself as well. The harsh inner critic that once drove your approval-seeking behavior softens into a wise inner guide. You treat yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend. You forgive your mistakes quickly and learn from them without drowning in shame. The journey to this inner freedom isn't linear. There will be moments when you catch yourself slipping back into old patterns, seeking validation or performing for others. This is natural and expected. The difference is that now you notice it happening. You can observe the pattern with curiosity rather than judgment and gently redirect yourself back to your authentic center. Each time you choose authenticity over approval, you strengthen what we might call your inner sovereignty. You prove to yourself that you can handle disapproval, that you can disappoint others and still be okay. that your worth isn't dependent on external validation. These small acts of courage accumulate into an unshakable foundation of self-trust. This is the ultimate gift of releasing the need for approval. You discover that everything you were seeking from others was already available within yourself. The love, acceptance, validation, and sense of worth you desperately wanted from the outside world has been there all along, waiting patiently for you to notice it. When you finally make this discovery, when you truly understand that your peace and happiness don't depend on anyone else's opinion, you experience what can only be described as coming home to yourself. You realize that you were never broken, never insufficient, never lacking anything essential. You were simply looking for completion in all the wrong places. This homecoming doesn't mark the end of growth or challenge. If anything, it marks the beginning of a more adventurous life because you're no longer held back by the fear of disapproval. You can take risks, express your truth, and live boldly because your sense of self is no longer at stake in every interaction. You become a beacon for others who are still trapped in the approval-seeking cycle, not through preaching or teaching, but simply through your example. People sense the freedom in you, the groundedness, the authentic confidence that comes not from arrogance, but from self-acceptance. They want to know how you got there. And that's when you realize the final paradox of this journey. In seeking nothing from others, you end up giving them something invaluable: permission to be themselves. Your freedom from the need for approval gives others permission to stop performing, to stop seeking validation, to come home to themselves as well. This is how inner transformation becomes outer transformation. This is how personal liberation contributes to collective healing. When you stop seeking approval and start living from your authentic center, you don't just change your own life. You change the lives of everyone you encounter simply by showing them what's possible when someone refuses to abandon themselves for the comfort of fitting in. The path to inner freedom through releasing the need for approval isn't just a personal journey. It's a revolutionary act in a world built on conformity and external validation. It's a return to the truth that has always been available to us, that we are enough, exactly as we are right now, in this moment, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it.